My name is Caleb Donovan. I'm 33 years old, and according to the badge folded into the drawer of my hospital nightstand, I run a structural engineering firm in Denver, Colorado. I know these facts the way you know a stranger's biography, accurate and completely disconnected from anything I could actually feel. Because when I opened my eyes for the first time in 8 days, none of it belonged to me yet. The light was the first thing, too white and too flat, humming faintly from somewhere above my head. Then the sound, a slow, steady beeping keeping time with something inside my own chest. I tried to turn toward it, and my neck screamed in protest. A weight pressed down on my right hand, not pain, pressure, someone holding on like they had no intention of letting go. Caleb. The voice cracked in the middle of my name, like she'd said it 100 times that week, and this was the first time it had actually worked. I turned my head, slow, toward the sound. A hand tightened around mine before I'd even found her face, gripping so hard I felt it in my knuckles, and only once I'd registered that, the fact of someone holding on rather than the shape of her, did I actually look. A woman was leaning so far over the bed rail her elbows had gone white with the pressure of it. Her hair had been pulled back into a knot that looked like it had been redone more than once without a mirror, and there were 2 dark crescents under her eyes that no amount of hospital lighting could soften. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in a real bed in over a week. "There you are," she whispered, and her whole face folded in on itself, relief and terror fighting for the same expression. "Oh my God, there you are." I opened my mouth to ask who she was, and nothing came out. My throat felt sanded down from the inside. She must have read the confusion before I could voice it, because she pressed my hand between both of hers and brought it to her mouth, and against my knuckles she said the 4 words that would take the rest of my life and split it clean in half. "Welcome back, husband." I stared at her. The machine kept beeping. A cart rattled past somewhere down the hall. Outside the window, past her shoulder, the sky was the flat white of a Denver morning in a season I couldn't have named if you'd asked me. I lay there, in a body that felt borrowed, searching for one single memory that matched the word she'd just used, and finding nothing at all. I finally managed. "I don't know who you are." I watched it land, watched her face move through something fast and complicated, hope collapsing into something closer to fear, before she caught it and smoothed it over the way you'd catch a glass before it hit the floor. "It's okay." The words came out too fast, like she needed to believe them before I did. "It's okay. The doctor said this might happen. I'm Julia. I'm your wife." The word sat wrong in the room, the way a chair sits wrong when it's been moved 2 inches from where it always stood. I couldn't have told you why. I just knew, somewhere underneath the fog, that something about it didn't fit. A nurse came in before I could ask anything else, checking the monitors, asking me to follow her finger with my eyes, asking me my name, the date, the name of the president. I got my name right. I got the date wrong by years. When she asked who was in the room with me, I looked at the woman who still hadn't let go of my hand and said, "She says she's my wife." The nurse didn't blink, which told me she'd already been briefed on all of it. "I'll get Dr. Bennett." She slipped back out. He arrived 20 minutes later with a tablet under one arm and the unhurried calm of a man who delivered this exact conversation on a fairly regular basis. "A single vehicle accident," he explained, 8 days ago, on a rain-slicked stretch of highway outside the city. The injury had disrupted my access to a block of recent autobiographical memory, the kind of thing doctors call retrograde amnesia, he said. Older memories could stay perfectly intact, while more recent ones went dark or came back only in fragments. Temporary, in most cases. "How much am I missing?" I asked. He checked the chart. "Based on what you've told us so far, your memory appears intact.
It appears you've
up
lost
to roughly
about
3 years
3
ago.
years of recent
Everything
memory.
more recent than that is either gone or badly fragmented, He said it gently, like a man breaking bad news about a house rather than a life. Some of it may resurface over the following weeks, he added. A smell, a sound, a place, they can trigger things. Some of it may not. I'd encourage you not to force it. 3 years. I did the math without meaning to. 3 years ago I would have been 30, and as far as my own mind was concerned, I had walked into this hospital a single man and woken up married to a woman I had never seen before in my life. I asked him whether 3 years of a life could really just disappear, or whether it was still down there somewhere, behind a door I hadn't found the key to yet. He told me nobody really knew for certain, that memory wasn't one single filing cabinet, but a dozen different systems that didn't always agree with each other, which struck me as both the most honest and the least comforting thing anyone had said to me all morning. Is there anything else you remember? The doctor asked. Anything from recently, even fragments. I closed my eyes and reached for it the way you reach for a word sitting right at the edge of your tongue. There was something there, a small velvet box. The particular give of a drawer sliding open in an office I couldn't quite picture. My own hands, and the strange, giddy fear of a man about to ask a question he already knew the answer to. I remember buying a ring, I said slowly. I think I was going to propose. Something moved behind Julia's eyes, there and gone so fast I nearly missed it. You did. You asked me on the river path behind the Botanic Gardens. I said yes before you'd even finished the sentence. It should have felt like coming home. Instead, it felt like being handed a photograph of a place I had never been, and told it was mine. Eleanor Donovan arrived that afternoon, the way she apparently did everything, on her own schedule, unannounced, dressed like she was stopping between meetings rather than visiting a son who had nearly died. I recognized her instantly, the same sharp line of jaw I'd seen in the bathroom mirror an hour earlier. 30 years of memory behind that recognition that Julia simply didn't have. Mom, I said, and the word came out solid and unremarkable. Nothing like the careful way I'd had to test the word wife less than an hour before. It should have been a relief, having one person in the room I actually remembered. Instead, it just made the blank space where Julia belonged feel even emptier. She crossed the room and pressed a dry kiss to my forehead, her hand cool against my cheek for exactly as long as it took to confirm I was actually awake. And then she straightened and looked past me at Julia with an expression so carefully neutral it might as well have been a wall. Ms. Wren, I trust the hospital has what it needs from you. Julia's spine went rigid. It's Donovan now, Eleanor. My mother's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Of course. Then she turned back to me before Julia could add anything else. The tone of it stayed with me long after she'd moved on to asking the doctor about my prognosis. The particular chill of a woman who hadn't corrected herself because she'd forgotten, but because she hadn't believed it in the first place. I filed it away without knowing yet that I'd need it. Before she left, she paused at the foot of the bed and looked at me with an expression that almost passed for warmth. The board meets in 12 days. The Sorrel merger vote can't wait much longer, Caleb, and I need to know you're going to be well enough to be there. I didn't know what the Sorrel merger was. I didn't say so. Something told me not to. Not yet. Not in front of either of them. I'll be there, because it seemed like the kind of thing the old version of me would have said, and because some instinct under the fog wanted my mother to leave satisfied rather than curious. After she'd gone, a nurse came back through to check my vitals and asked, almost as an aside, how long the two of us had been married. 18 months, Julia said, before I could even open my mouth, the number coming out fast and smooth, like something rehearsed rather than lived. I didn't know yet why that struck me as wrong. I only knew, in the same buried, wordless way I had known the word wife didn't fit, that I had just watched someone lie. That night, after the nurses had dimmed the halls and the hospital had gone quiet except for the occasional beep of some other room's monitor, Julia pulled a chair beside my bed instead of going home. The same way, she told me, she had every night for 8 days straight. I watched her do it, not the way she looked yet, but the way she moved, like she'd worn a groove into that particular 6 feet of linoleum. "Tell me about us," I said. Not because I doubted her, not yet, because I wanted, badly, for something about my own life to feel like it belonged to me again. She told me we'd met at a friend's engagement party 2.5 years ago, that I'd spilled a drink on her shoes and spent 40 minutes apologizing before she finally told me to stop and just buy her a replacement pair. She told me about a trip to the mountains where the car broke down, and we'd had to hitch a ride with a rancher who talked for 3 hours straight about his cattle. Small, true-sounding details, delivered with the kind of specificity that should have put me at ease. When I asked about the proposal again, she gave me more. The exact bend in the river path, the color of the sky, the fact that I'd gotten down on one knee in the mud without even noticing until my jeans were ruined. It was a good story. It was, I would understand much later, a very good story. I reached for her left hand without thinking, wanting to see the ring, wanting one solid object I could hold on to in all of this. She let me take it. The band was thin and plain, gold, no stone. Somewhere under the fog, some old machinery in my head, the same part of me that apparently built things for a living and couldn't stop double-checking its own math, quietly noted that it didn't match the ring in my memory, the one with the small green stone I could still see clearly if I closed my eyes. I didn't say anything. I told myself memory was unreliable right now, that Bennett had said as much, that maybe we'd chosen something different in the end. I told myself a lot of things that first night. Most of them, it turned out, were exactly what I needed to believe in order to keep sleeping. The days that followed folded into each other in a way that made time hard to track. Physical therapy in the mornings, a parade of specialists in the afternoons, Julia in the chair by the window through most of it, bringing coffee from the cafeteria that I apparently used to take with too much sugar. A therapist named Priya had me squeezing a rubber ball and naming objects on a laminated card. And on the third try, I got frustrated enough to throw the ball across the room, and Julia caught it out of the air without even looking up from her phone, a reflex built from years of living with someone clumsy, or so I assumed at the time. On the second day, she showed up with a small potted succulent balanced on top of a stack of paperwork and set it on the windowsill without much explanation beyond, something hard to kill, in case you're still relearning how to keep things alive. It was the first time since I'd woken up that I actually laughed, and the sound of it seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised me. Small things surfaced without warning after that. The smell of rain through a cracked window sent something sharp and wordless through my chest, gone before I could name it. A song on a nurse's radio made my hand twitch like it wanted to reach for a steering wheel. None of it came with context, fragments exactly like Bennett had promised, arriving and vanishing before I could hold them still long enough to understand what they meant. Sam dropped off a battered site notebook from my desk on the third day, the kind of thing I apparently filled with load calculations and half-sketched beam details, and flipping through it felt like meeting a competent stranger. The early pages were careful and precise. Mine, in a way, almost nothing else in that room was. The last handful of entries, dated only weeks before the crash, were sloppier. The pen pressed harder into the paper, like whoever wrote them had been in a hurry to get somewhere else. I couldn't read anything into it yet. I just knew it didn't match the rest of the notebook, and I kept flipping back to those last pages the way you keep pressing on a bruise to see if it still hurts. On the fourth day, steady enough to sit up without the room tilting, I asked for my phone. Julia hesitated, just barely, a half-second too long, before she reached into her bag and handed it over. My thumb found the passcode without my mind's permission. The numbers arriving the way a habit arrives, faster than thought. Some kinds of memory, I was learning, lived in the hands instead of the head. The home screen loaded to a photo of a mountain trail with no people in it at all. I opened messages first, found Julia's name near the top of the list, a long thread stretching back more than 2 years, warm at the start, full of small jokes and photos of flowers I assumed came from wherever she worked. Then, about 6 weeks before the accident, the tone started to shift, replies getting shorter, gaps between them stretching longer, the easy back and forth thinning into something careful and distant. The last message in the entire thread was time-stamped the night of the crash, sent just after 10. I can't do this anymore. Please don't call me. I mean it, Caleb. Nothing after that at all. Not from her, not from me. Just silence where a reply should have been. I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time, reading that last line over and over, waiting for it to rearrange itself into something that made sense. There were no wedding photos anywhere in my camera roll. No florist, no dress, no rings laid side by side on a table the way people photograph them. Just 6 weeks of something quietly falling apart. And then, apparently, a marriage I had no memory of and no evidence of at all. I hadn't decided what to do with any of it by the time Sam showed up, which was probably for the best, because Sam walked in loud and grinning and relieved in a way that cracked something open in my chest before I'd even said a word. Sam Okafor had been my closest friend since college and my second at the firm for almost as long. And something about the easy, familiar way he dropped into the chair by my bed felt more solid than almost anything else that had happened in that room all week. "You scared the hell out of me, man," he said, and for a second neither of us added anything else, because some things don't need dressing up. We talked about the firm first, because it was easier, because numbers and deadlines didn't require me to admit I couldn't remember my own life. He told me about a bridge inspection contract we'd landed, about a junior engineer who kept mislabeling load calculations, about the board getting anxious over whether I'd be well enough to weigh in once the Sorrel merger came up for a vote. I mentioned Julia without thinking much about it, said something like, "My wife's been here every day," and watched Sam's easy grin falter, just slightly, just long enough for me to notice. "Wife," he repeated, careful, like he was handling something that might be sharp. "Caleb, you and Julia had been falling apart for weeks. The night of the accident, right after she sent you that message, you called me at 2 in the morning. I tried to talk you out of driving over there. You didn't listen." The room went very still. I know what I found on my phone. I know about the message. I thought maybe I got there and we worked it out. "I didn't finish it, Sam. If you did," he said gently, "you never told me. And man, we told each other everything. There's no way you'd have kept something like getting married from me." He hesitated, then added, almost like an afterthought, though I could tell it wasn't. "Did you ever end up giving her that ring? The one with the little emerald from Fitzgerald's downtown? You'd had it for over a year, kept saying you were waiting for the right moment." I sat there with that sentence landing on me like weight. Over a year, waiting for a moment that, as far as anyone in that room could prove, had never actually come. I didn't confront Julia that night. I told myself I needed to be sure, which was true, but it was also easier than the alternative. The next afternoon, with Sam's words and the phone and the wrong ring all sitting in my chest like stones, I asked her, as casually as I could manage, what the officiant's name had been. There was a small pause, just barely long enough to notice if you were looking for it, and I was looking for it now. A woman from the courthouse. I don't remember her name. It was a busy day. I asked where we'd filed the license. "County records. We can request a copy anytime you want." I asked, gently, if Sam had been there. Her eyes flicked toward the door before she answered. and something in that half-second told me she was doing math, trying to work out how much I already knew before she committed to an answer. It was small, just the two of us. I let it sit there between us instead of pushing further, and I watched her watch me. And for the first time since I'd woken up in that room, I understood that the woman across from me was afraid of me in a way that had nothing to do with the accident at all. I told her everything I knew that evening, laid it out flat the way I would have laid out a structural report, because it was the only language I had left that still felt reliable. The message on my phone, Sam's account, the ring that didn't match. I watched her go pale, watched her hands go completely still in her lap, and then, quietly, without any of the smoothness from before, she told me the truth. We were never married, she said. Sam was the first person the hospital reached that night. He called me because he knew what had happened between us only hours before, and I came straight here. At the ICU desk, they asked if I was family, and I panicked, and I said I was your wife because I was terrified they'd make me leave. Nobody challenged it. After that, I didn't know how to take it back. I'm sorry. I should have told you the second you asked me. I sat there and let the silence stretch, because I didn't trust anything that might come out of my mouth yet. Why did we break up? I finally asked. Her jaw tightened. Your mother came to see me 6 weeks before the accident. She told me you and Preston Sorrell had already agreed that marrying Whitney was part of finalizing the deal, that if I really loved you, I'd let you do it without a fight, without hurting the people who depended on the company. She showed me an email. It looked real, Caleb. I believed her. She said talking to you would just make it harder, that you'd already made your choice, and confronting you would only hurt us both for nothing. I spent 6 weeks trying to convince myself that stepping back quietly was its own kind of love, the kind that doesn't ask for credit. The night of the accident, I finally sent the text instead of calling you, and I hated myself for it. And I never let myself take it back because some small, stupid part of me thought I wasn't good enough for any of it anyway. Then why lie to the hospital in the first place, I asked. Why not just tell them the truth? You still would have known I was here, she admitted, her voice cracking for the first time since I'd woken up. You still would have known I never stopped, even after I convinced myself I had no right to. I sat with all of it for a long time. Somewhere in the middle of it was my mother's name, and somewhere in it was the accident itself. The fact I'd apparently been driving that night, in the rain, hours after that text arrived. I know you were driving toward me, Julia said quietly. Sam told me after. I don't know what you would have said if you'd made it. I've wondered every single day since. I didn't answer that. I couldn't. Everyone I had met since opening my eyes in that room had been managing me in some way. My mother with her careful, neutral face, Julia with her rehearsed river and mud proposal. And I was so tired, suddenly, of being handled by people who claimed to love me. I need some time, I told her. Please go home tonight. She didn't argue. She just stood, and at the door she stopped and said, without turning around, I never lied about loving you, only about the rest. Then she was gone, and the room felt enormous and empty in a way it hadn't since the first morning I woke up in it. My mother visited twice over the next 2 days, and both times she brought a folder. The first held brochures for a private recovery facility in Arizona, all soft lighting and mountain views, the kind of place where, according to her, I could focus entirely on getting better without any complications. The second held nothing about my recovery at all. It held a proposed press release announcing the Sorrell merger, my name and Whitney's side by side in the second paragraph, in a sentence about the two families' shared vision for the company's future. I hadn't agreed to any of it. I told her so. She sat very straight in the visitor's chair and said that under the circumstances, with my judgment still recovering and no valid marriage on file to complicate the paperwork, She had simply assumed she was protecting the parts of my life I wasn't yet well enough to protect myself. Protecting me from what? I asked. From a woman who works in a flower shop and clearly has no idea what your future is supposed to look like. Something in the flat certainty of it made the whole room feel colder. Whitney Sorrell came by that same afternoon, uninvited, carrying a small bouquet from a shop I didn't recognize, which struck me even then as an oddly cruel choice given everything. She was pleasant, a little nervous, clearly unsure of the ground she was standing on, and I found myself almost feeling sorry for her before I remembered I had no idea yet how much she actually knew. When I asked, carefully, how long she and my mother had been discussing all this, she answered without any hesitation at all, which told me she didn't yet understand she was handing me something dangerous, since before the accident. Your mom said you two had basically already agreed. I just figured, with everything that happened, we'd pick it back up whenever you were ready. Before the accident. The same window, almost to the week, as the message on my phone, as Julia's story about the email. My mother hadn't found an opportunity in my amnesia. She had built the whole thing months before I ever went into that ditch, and the crash had simply handed her a version of her son with no memory left to argue back. I found Julia 3 days later at Marigold Lane, the little shop she'd built from nothing, according to Sam, who had finally told me the parts of our history he'd been carefully avoiding. The front window had a paper sign taped inside it, hand-lettered, apologizing to customers for the limited stock while she looked for a new location. Inside, she was on her knees behind the counter, wrapping ceramic pots in newspaper and setting them into a cardboard box, her hands moving fast and efficient, even though her shoulders looked like they hadn't stopped shaking in days. She looked up when the bell over the door rang and went very still. "You're moving," I said, instead of any of the things I'd rehearsed on the drive over. "Your mother bought this building 2 years ago," she admitted, quiet, like it cost her something to say out loud. My original lease expired 2 months ago and had been rolling month to month while we negotiated a renewal. 4 days ago, her lawyer sent formal notice. 3 weeks, and the rent triples or I'm out. I stood there for a second, letting that settle next to everything else my mother had apparently been quietly assembling for over a year without my knowledge. A fake email, a fabricated agreement, a building bought and held in reserve like a loaded threat, waiting for the right moment to go off. "I'm sorry I asked you to leave that night. I needed to hear it from someone besides you, and I found it, and none of it was your fault. It was mine. I should have called you the second she showed me that email. I should have trusted 2 years of you over one folder from a woman who never once looked at me like I belonged in your life. Maybe, or maybe you were scared, and she is very good at making people scared, and I understand that better now than I did a week ago." I crossed the small space between us, stepping past boxes of newspaper-wrapped pots, and told her the one thing that had felt completely true since I'd opened my eyes in that hospital room. I don't remember most of the last 3 years. I don't remember losing you, and some days I think that's the only mercy in any of this. But I remember buying that ring. I remember exactly how it felt, deciding I wanted my whole life to include you in it. That part never left, Julia. Not for one single day. Not even the days I couldn't have told you your own name. She started crying then. The real kind, not the composed hospital room kind. And I pulled her into me and held on the way she'd apparently held on to my hand for 8 days before I ever knew her name at all. We stood like that long enough that a customer peered through the window, saw 2 people wrapped around each other between half-packed boxes, and quietly decided to come back another day. I went to see my mother alone the next morning, in the house I still didn't fully remember growing up in, and I laid it all out on her kitchen island the way I'd laid it out for Julia, flat and unavoidable. Whitney's slip about the timing, The building she'd quietly purchased and sat on for 2 years, like a piece on a chessboard, waiting. The email Julia had described in enough detail that there was no mistaking what it had been built to do. My mother didn't deny any of it, which surprised me more than an outright lie would have. She stood very straight at her own counter and said that everything she'd done to keep the company, and by extension the families who depended on it, from collapsing under a merger that would have swallowed us whole without the alliance she'd engineered. She said Julia was a lovely girl but not built for the life I was supposed to have, and that someday, when I understood the full weight of what I was responsible for, I would thank her for it. I told her the accident happened the same night as that text, that I had been driving in the rain, almost certainly trying to reach a woman she'd just spent weeks convincing to disappear from my life. Something cracked, just slightly, behind her composure, the first real thing I'd seen from her since I woke up. "I didn't know," she said quietly, and I believed that part, at least. "I didn't know you might have been driving to find her." I told her the merger would happen on my terms if it happened at all, and that Whitney Sorrell's name would appear in exactly 0 press releases about my personal life, now or ever. And I told her, because it needed saying out loud in that house at least once, that protecting a company by dismantling her own son's life wasn't protection at all. It was just control, wearing a more respectable coat. She didn't apologize, not that day. But she didn't argue either, and for my mother, I was beginning to understand that silence was as close to an admission as I was likely to get for a long while. The board vote happened 12 days after I first opened my eyes in that hospital room, exactly as she had promised it would, and I stood in front of it with my memory still full of holes and told them the Sorrell merger would move forward on financial terms alone, no family alliance attached, no names traded like collateral to close a deal. It passed. My mother sat 2 seats down the table and said nothing at all, which by then felt like its own kind of victory. 4 months later, my mother and I had settled into something that wasn't quite warmth, but wasn't the cold, careful distance of that first week either. Mostly built out of short phone calls and the occasional dinner where neither of us mentioned Whitney Sorrell at all. The merger closed on the terms I'd set at that board vote, and the company kept its name, and 80-some families kept their jobs, which was apparently all my mother had actually wanted underneath everything else, even if she'd gone about getting it in a way I doubted I'd ever fully forgive. I was clearing out the last of an old office I hadn't used since before the accident, boxing up files for a move to a smaller space Sam and I had decided better suited how we actually worked now, and I found it at the back of the bottom desk drawer, exactly where some version of myself I still couldn't fully remember had apparently hidden it and forgotten to come back for. A small black velvet box. Inside, a thin gold band with a single small emerald, sitting in the same tissue paper it must have come wrapped in over a year and a half earlier. I didn't need my memory to know what it was. My hands already knew. I sat with it for a while at that old desk, in an office that still smelled faintly of the man I must have been before the crash, and thought about how strange it was to grieve a version of yourself you'd never technically met. Then I closed the box, put it in my coat pocket, and drove straight to Marigold Lane without calling ahead. The shop had reopened 3 weeks earlier in a new space 2 blocks from the old one. Better light, a wider window, Julia's name painted fresh across the glass in gold letters that still smelled faintly of paint. On the windowsill inside, half hidden behind a row of ferns, sat a small succulent in a chipped clay pot I recognized instantly, somehow still alive after everything. Through the window I could see her kneeling by a display of evening primrose, sleeves pushed up, dirt on her forearms, laughing at something a customer had said. I waited until the shop had emptied, and she'd flipped the sign to closed before I went in. The bell rang over the door. She looked up, and whatever she saw on my face made her set down the watering can slowly, carefully, like she already knew this was a moment that shouldn't be rushed. I found something of mine today. I took the box out of my pocket. Memory is a strange thing to build a life on, I've learned, because mine still has holes in it that may never fully close. For a long time I thought that made me less certain of everything, including her. But it turns out you don't need every memory intact to know exactly who you'd choose again in any version of your life, with or without the years you can't get back. I opened the box and held it out, not on one knee, not by any river, just standing in a shop that smelled like soil and green stems, in front of the only person who had made the last 4 months feel like they belonged to me at all. I don't remember choosing this ring, but I remember exactly who I was choosing it for. I'm asking for real this time, Julia. No hospital, no lie standing in for the truth. Just you, if you'll have me. She didn't say anything for a long moment, and then she laughed, wet and startled and joyful all at once, and wiped her eyes with the back of one dirt-streaked hand before she held it out to me. Yes, this time, completely yes. The bell over the door rang again behind me as a late customer pushed it open, took one look at the two of us standing there, and quietly stepped back out to wait on the sidewalk, and neither of us noticed her leave.